Chapter 1. Our arrival. Who are you? The material possessions you accumulate are not going to make you happy. We all know this. And yet many people search for life's meaning through accumulating more possessions. Real happiness, however, comes from who you are, from who you've become. Real happiness comes from within. Likewise, discontentment is also a result of who you've become. Consequently, if you are living intentionally and meaningfully, you will feel happy, fulfilled, and content a vast majority of the time. If you want to base your life on that of the average person's life, then this book is not for you, because the average person is not happy. And just because most people are unhappy doesn't mean you have to be. You don't have to settle for a mediocre life just because the people around you have settled. Finding discontent. In 2009, life looked great for both of us. We both worked for the same telecommunications corporation. Joshua since 1999, Ryan since 2004. We both enjoyed all the perks of a lifestyle most people envied. We both lived our version of the American dream. But for some reason neither one of us could explain at the time, we were not happy, we didn't feel fulfilled, and we certainly didn't feel content. The topic of happiness began peeking its beautiful little head into our conversations more frequently as time passed. With each promotion at work, with each award or fancy trip we won, with every nugget of praise we received, the happiness accompanying those things quickly came and went. The faster it came, the faster it was gone. So we sought happiness by attempting to get more of these nuggets of praise, trying to improve our feelings of self-worth and significance by achieving more. We worked harder and harder to obtain these nuggets, often working twice as many hours as the average American to prove our value. It was something like a cocaine high. The more praise we got, the more we needed it just to function, the more we needed it to feel happy. It got to the point where we were living just to break even emotionally. Discontent flooded our lives. We knew something needed to change, but we weren't sure what. So we did what most Americans do. We tried to purchase happiness. Even though we were both earning over six figures in well-respected positions, we spent more money than we made, purchasing things like luxury cars, large houses, big screen TVs, fancy furniture, expensive vacations, and everything else our heavily mediated consumer culture told us would make us happy. But it didn't make us happy. In fact, it brought us even more unhappiness and discontent, because not only did the old feelings stick around, but we added to those feelings by going into debt. And when the temporary high from each of our purchases dissipated, we were left feeling depressed, empty, alone, and helpless. And then, in late 2009, a series of dreadful events made Joshua begin to question every aspect of his life, including his material possessions, his career, his success, and the meaning of life. A slow burn, but let's rewind our story a bit, because our discontent didn't suddenly descend from the heavens, striking us like a bolt of lightning. We didn't wake up one morning and say, gee, everything was fine yesterday, but today I'm unhappy. Discontentment doesn't work that way. Rather, it's a slow burn. It's a pernicious problem that creeps into your life after years of subtle dissatisfaction. It started when we were young. The first signs of discontent appeared in our lives well before our days in corporate America. It started when we were children. The two of us met 20 years ago in the 5th grade in Lebanon, Ohio, a small town between Cincinnati and Dayton. We were 10 years old, and even by then our lives were filled with discontent. We both grew up in dysfunctional households during the 1980s, before dysfunctional was a popular term. Both sets of our parents were divorced. Joshua's parents separated when he was 3. His mother fell victim to alcoholism, forcing him to raise himself most years after age 6. His bipolar, schizophrenic father died when he was 9. Ryan's mother had similar substance abuse issues, which later led to substance abuse for Ryan as a teenager. Both of us were raised in less than ideal conditions for much of our childhoods, which in retrospect was a recipe for disaster. By age 12, we were both overweight, uncool, and utterly unhappy with our lives. We did things to try to escape. Back then, the easiest escape was food. We experienced instant gratification by stuffing our faces. We felt certain we would be happy, at least for a moment. It was one of the few aspects of our lives we could control, because everything else felt so out of control. We lived in dilapidated, cockroach-infested apartments with single mothers who cared about us, but who were more concerned with getting drunk or high than providing for their children. As we approached high school, Ryan moved in with his father into a much more stable household. His father owned a small painting and wallpapering company and was able to provide a better lower-middle-class lifestyle. Ryan's father was the antithesis of his mother. He held a stable job, he showed he cared in myriad ways, and he was a devout Jehovah's Witness, among other radical differences. The long list of positive changes were too much for Ryan to handle all at once. So while he did his best to conform to the strict household rules, he also rebelled, experimenting with alcohol, marijuana, and harder drugs. Joshua took a different route. While he didn't experiment with alcohol or drugs most likely because he was so turned off by his mother's rampant alcoholism, he found another way to cope, namely obsession and compulsion in the form of OCD. He discovered that even though he couldn't control his living situation, the crappy apartment, the drunken mother, the lack of money, he could control himself. So he lost a lot of weight during his freshman year in high school in an unhealthy way by eating very little, and he spent hours organizing his meager possessions, obsessing over the smallest things, looking for some kind of order in a world of chaos. During our last year of high school, we had a memorable conversation that we still talk about today as being the tipping point that led us into the chaos and confusion of our consumer-driven culture. Because we grew up relatively poor, we thought that the key to our happiness would be money. Specifically, if we could just make $50,000 per year, then we'd be set. Our parents hadn't earned that kind of money, and they weren't happy, so we figured if we could pass some kind of arbitrary threshold, $50,000 per annum, in this case, then we would somehow be happy. It sounds ridiculous now, but it made perfect sense to a couple of 18-year-olds who were about to enter the world on their own. We graduated high school in 1999 and went in our own directions for a few years. Neither of us went to college straight away. Instead, we both entered the working world. Ryan worked for his father, hanging wallpaper and painting walls in opulent houses throughout Southwest Ohio. Joshua found a sales job with a large corporation. Both careers were steeped in certain monetary expectations. Neither of us particularly enjoyed what we were doing, but we didn't know any better. We didn't realize you could actually do work you enjoyed. For us, our jobs were designed to do two things for our lifestyle: allow us to make money and give us a certain kind of social status. Ryan was making enough money to live. It wasn't great money, but it paid the bills. He also earned an identity from his job. The fleet of half a dozen Nicodemus paint trucks that patrolled the streets of Warren County, Ohio, spoke volumes for his future. Plus, there was comfort in knowing that one day he would take over his father's business, making it his own, and maybe even passing it on to his future children. But Ryan also knew the painting business wouldn't make him rich. He was painting multi-million-dollar homes, which he knew he'd never be able to afford, even when he took over his dad's business, which, if he worked really hard, he'd be able to do once his dad retired in a decade or two. There was a fair amount of discontent that showed up for Ryan, realizing that he would never be able to get something he wanted. Although at the time he didn't know why he wanted a palatial home or why it would make him happy, he was merely unhappy with the fact that he would never be able to afford such a luxurious house. So Ryan searched for contentment in other ways. Joshua found a job in which he had the potential to earn more money than the people with whom he went to high school, a job that had long-term career growth possibilities. All he had to do was work like an Iditarod sled dog to get results. So work like a dog he did, often working more than a month straight, 7 days a week without a day off. The more he worked, the more he sold. And the more he sold, the more money he earned, and the more he was showered with praise. At 18, he was already making more money than his mother ever had. He was poised for corporate greatness, at least ostensibly. But Joshua experienced discontent too. Although he was making over $50,000 by age 20, he had little personal time. The corporate world of performing and achieving was taking its toll, so he tried to purchase happiness. He tried to manufacture a life of contentment. Manufacture contentment, unhappy with our jobs and our personal lives. We tried to fix our discontent in different ways. Ryan turned to a couple extremes. First, he turned back to his father's religion, the religion of his childhood, swearing off drugs and worldly activities, becoming a devout Jehovah's Witness, embracing its tenets, and searching for life's meaning through religion. Ryan married his high school girlfriend at 18, a few months after graduating high school. He and his wife adopted the JW religious tenets, bought a small house in a small hometown in which they were raised, and started talking about creating a family together. But it turned out to be a marriage saturated with fear and distrust. After 3 years of tedious matrimony, the marriage ended nastily, upon which Ryan turned back to drugs and alcohol, looking for an escape from his painful, failed reality. Joshua, on the other hand, continued his laser-focused work in corporate America. He worked his tail off, consistently performing as one of the best salespeople in the entire company. He earned his first promotion to a leadership managerial position at 22, making him the youngest person in the company's 130-year history to have earned the position. With this promotion came more money, more responsibility, and somehow even more work. Joshua's life was consumed by work. At age 23, he got married, bought a house in suburbia, and continued to work more and more as his personal life seemed to occur somewhere in the unfocused background somewhere to the right of the frame. He hardly realized he had gotten married. He neglected and took for granted the relationship with his wonderful wife. He hardly noticed the purchase of a large house with more bedrooms than inhabitants. He hardly noticed the discontent that was brewing within him. He simply knew he wasn't happy, but life went on at its breakneck pace. To deal with his more subtle discontent, Joshua tried to buy his happiness. He spent money on stuff, buying fancy clothes, expensive vacations, consumer electronics, gadgets, and multitudes of unnecessary junk. When those things didn't bring lasting happiness, he turned to his childhood vice of food. By his early 20s, he weighed more than he had ever weighed. He was 70 pounds overweight and severely out of shape. But at least I'm making money, he thought, giving himself an identity in his job, giving himself a certain kind of status and satisfaction in knowing that he performed well at his job, albeit a job he didn't love and wasn't passionate about. Reconnecting the duo, it was around this time that we reconnected, almost accidentally, at the nadir of our early 20s. Ryan decided that taking over his father's business was not for him. He didn't know what he wanted to do, but he thought he'd give the corporate world a shot. Because if he could just make over $50,000 per year, then life would be good and he would be happy, right? So in 2004, shortly after Joshua got married and Ryan got divorced, Joshua hired Ryan to work at the corporation in which he had slaved for the last half-decade. Like Joshua, Ryan quickly excelled, working incredibly hard and becoming one of the company's top-performing salespeople. We both earned several more promotions over the years during our mid and late 20s promotions with fancy titles like channel manager, regional manager, and director. And with those titles came more money and more responsibility and more work. Sadly, some far darker things came with those promotions as well. Anxiety and stress and worry and overwhelm and depression. And yet, try as we did, our search for happiness through status and material possessions never yielded real lasting happiness or contentment. By our late 20s, we were earning great money at jobs we disliked, but we were in debt financially and emotionally. Back to the future, fast forward back to 2009, back to our 80-hour work weeks, back to our ostensibly perfect lives that were crumbling on the inside. On October 8, 2009, Joshua's mother died of stage 4 lung cancer. She battled it over a year, enduring repeat chemo and radiation treatments. But the cancer spread to her brain and other organs, and she was no match for the disease in the end. Oddly enough, the cancer seemed to be a metaphor for Joshua's life as well. While things looked good on the surface, the marriage, the fancy job, the cars, the material possessions, there was something seriously wrong on the inside. Truth be told, neither of us were happy. When we told ourselves a decade earlier that we'd be happy if we could just make $50,000 per year, we were wrong. At first, in our early 20s, we thought maybe we had simply miscalculated the exact amount required to be happy, so we changed our estimation. If we could make $60,000 per year, then we could be happy, right? And when that didn't work, if we could make $75,000 and then $90,000 and then $100,000 per year, then we could be happy, right? It was a never-ending cycle. Each year we made more money, and yet each year we spent more than we earned in an effort to subdue our perpetual discontent created by the lifestyles we were living. The equation itself was broken. After Joshua's mother died, we had another conversation about happiness. We discussed why we weren't happy and what it would take to make us happy. Obviously, the old formula of, if we could make $X, then we could be happy, was not panning out. We were both making over 6 figures. We were both successful 28-year-old young executives. We both had it figured out according to certain cultural standards. But we knew the truth. We didn't have it figured out at all. Was this what we had been waiting for all our lives? Were we going to continue to work ridiculously long hours at a corporation that didn't care about us? Were we going to work our way into upper-level management, becoming COOs or CEOs with 7- or 8-figure salaries just to be even more depressed by the time we were in our early 40s? It didn't sound appealing to us. Our dreams of climbing the corporate ladder seemed more like nightmares the more we talked about it. The death of Joshua's mother put everything into perspective. We only have a finite amount of time on this earth. It can be spent accumulating monetary wealth, or it can be spent in a meaningful way, the latter of which doesn't necessarily preclude someone from the former. But the relentless pursuit of riches doesn't lead to a meaningful life. So we decided to take an inventory of our lives. We wanted to find out what was making us unhappy and what we needed to do to change those things in our lives so we could experience happiness, passion, and freedom. Anchors first, we identified our anchors. In other words, we had discovered that getting what we wanted Large houses, bigger paychecks, material possessions, and corporate awards wasn't making us happy, so we wanted to identify what was anchoring us, what was making us feel stuck and preventing us from growing. The concept of anchors really struck a chord with both of us. It forced us to take an honest look in the mirror and identify everything we thought might be holding us back from living happy, fulfilled lives. The exercise we performed was simple. Over the course of 1 week, each of us wrote down anything we thought might be an anchor. After all, the first step to solving a problem is to identify the problem, right? As the week progressed, our lists of anchors grew, and by the end of the week Joshua had written down 83 anchors and Ryan, 54. Plenty of anchors. Our next step was to identify our priorities. We started prioritizing by breaking our anchors into 2 categories: major anchors and minor anchors. Major anchors were the most obvious examples of things that were keeping us from feeling free and content, including things like our houses, viz. The large mortgage payments that went with them, certain relationships with people, viz. Unhealthy, pernicious relationships that didn't add value to our lives, car payments and other large bills, major debts, our careers, and anything else that took an appreciable amount of our time without returning value to our lives. Minor anchors made up the bulk of our lists and included items like cable bills, internet bills, other bills, smaller debts, unused clothes, unused household items, nighttime college classes, household clutter, certain unproductive or unhealthy periphery relationships, daily drive time, time wasted in the car each day, and other small things that took small amounts of our time, attention, and focus. We decided that getting rid of many of these anchors over a period of time would allow us to reclaim much of our own time, time which could be spent in more meaningful ways. Because the major anchors appeared to be the hardest to tackle, we started with those in an effort to deal with the hardest things first. For example, every extra penny Joshua earned was spent on making extra payments toward his debts. No more trips, vacations, or fancy dinners. All his money went towards paying off his car and his vast credit card debt, which, despite a healthy income, had climbed to an incredibly unhealthy level. Eventually, over a 2-year period, Joshua paid off his car and paid down his debts. Other major anchors were handled in a similar fashion. We eventually jettisoned many of our possessions, eliminating the excess in favor of things we liked and enjoyed, things we actually used in our daily lives. Over the course of 2 years, our anchors of old were no longer weighing us down. Making hard decisions because some of the major anchors involved our relationships with other people. Some tough decisions had to be made. Soon after Joshua's mother died in late 2009, Joshua decided that his marriage of nearly 6 years wasn't working. He knew that neither he nor his wife were happy, that neither of their values or long-term desires were aligned, and that they both wanted vastly different things in life. They loved each other and wanted to find a way to make their marriage work, so they sat down and talked about their differences and worked on a plan to save their marriage. They both attended marriage counseling and took steps to come into better alignment, working together for months in an effort to repair a broken marriage. Their differences, however, were too great, and Joshua and his wife decided to part ways. It was the hardest decision he ever had to make. Thankfully, they were able to remain close friends who still care about each other deeply. Furthermore, Joshua was faced with the dilemma of what to do with his mother's stuff after her death, those sentimental items we tend to hold on to in perpetuity. It was an incredibly difficult time in his life, it goes without saying. His mother had lived 1,000 miles away, and after she passed it was his responsibility to vacate her apartment in Florida. It was a small 1-bedroom place, but it was packed wall to wall with her belongings. His mother had great taste. She could have been an interior designer, and none of her stuff was junk in the hoarder's sense of the word. Nevertheless, there was a lot of stuff in her home, likely 3 or 4 apartments worth of stuff in her tiny 1-bedroom apartment. His mom was always shopping, always accumulating more stuff. She had antique furniture throughout her apartment, a stunning oak canopy bed that consumed almost her entire bedroom, 2 closets jam-packed with clothes, picture frames standing on every flat surface, original artwork hanging on the walls, and tasteful creative decorations in every nook and cranny and crevasse. There was 64 years of accumulation in her apartment. So Joshua did what any son would do. He rented a large U-Haul truck. Then he called a storage facility back in Ohio to make sure they had a big enough storage unit. The cost of the truck was $1,600. The storage facility was $120 per month for the size he needed. Financially, the cost was expensive, but he quickly found out that the emotional cost was much higher. At first, Joshua didn't want to let go of anything. If you've ever lost a parent or a loved one, or have been through similarly emotional time, then you understand exactly how hard it was for him to let go of any of those possessions. So instead of letting go, He was going to cram every trinket and figurine and piece of oversized furniture into that Lilliputian storage locker in Ohio. Floor to ceiling. That way he knew that Mom's stuff was there if he ever wanted it, if he ever needed access to it for some incomprehensible reason. He even planned to put a few pieces of her furniture in his home as subtle reminders of her. The week after her death, he started boxing up her belongings. Every picture frame and every little porcelain doll and every white doily on every shelf. He packed every bit of her that remained, or so he thought, and then he looked under her bed. Among the organized chaos that comprised a crawlspace beneath her bed, there were 4 boxes, each labeled with a number. Each numbered box was sealed with packing tape. Joshua cut through the tape and found old papers from his elementary school days from nearly a quarter century earlier. Spelling tests, cursive writing lessons, artwork. It was all there, every shred of paper from his first 4 years of school. It was evident that she hadn't accessed the sealed boxes in years, and yet she had held on to these things because she was trying to hold on to pieces of her son, pieces of the past, much like Joshua was attempting to hold on to pieces of her and her past now. That's when he realized his retention efforts were futile. He could hold on to her memories without her stuff, just as she had always remembered him and his childhood and all their memories without ever accessing those sealed boxes under her bed. She didn't need papers from 25 years ago to remember her son, just as her son didn't need a storage locker filled with her stuff to remember her. Joshua called U-Haul and canceled the truck. And then over the next 12 days, he donated all her stuff, 100% of it to places and people who could actually use it. Of course it was difficult to let go, but Joshua realized quite a few things about the relationship between our memories and our possessions during the entire experience. We are not our stuff. We are more than our possessions. Our memories are not under our beds. Our memories are within us, not our things. An item that is merely sentimental for us can be useful for someone else. Holding on to things weighs on us mentally and emotionally. Old photographs can be scanned. You can take pictures of items you want to remember. Letting go is incredibly freeing. It is important to note that we don't think that sentimental items are bad or evil or that holding on to them is wrong. We don't. Rather, we think the pernicious nature of sentimental items and overt sentimentality in general is far more subtle. If you want to get rid of an item, but the only reason you are holding on to it is for sentimental reasons if it is weighing on you, if it's an anchor, then perhaps it's time to get rid of it. Perhaps it's time to free yourself of the weight. That doesn't mean you need to get rid of everything, though. One by one, over time, the two of us tackled many of our anchors, big and small. In the process of tackling our anchors, we searched for ways to do so more efficiently. We searched for examples of people who had overcome their fears, who had freed themselves of their anchors and started living more meaningful lives. This is how we inadvertently stumbled upon the concepts of minimalism. Discovering minimalism in late 2009, shortly after Joshua's mother had died, while his marriage was in shambles, and we were both unhappy with our current nose-to-the-grindstone situations, Joshua came across a website called Exile Lifestyle, developed by a guy named Colin Wright. We were intrigued by Colin's website. Here was this young, 24-year-old entrepreneur who was living an amazing lifestyle, a seemingly impossible lifestyle. He had left his high-paying job to pursue his passions, which happened to be traveling the world and running his businesses from anywhere. His website, what he called a blog, a term we were unfamiliar with at the time, documented his travels and allowed his thousands of readers to participate in his journey. Colin's readers got to vote on where he would travel next. We were amazed that this guy left everything to travel to a new country every 4 months. Not that we wanted to travel that extensively ourselves, we didn't, but we did want to have the freedom to pursue our own passions, which we had discovered weren't inside the corporate juggernaut. Colin also used a new term with which we were utterly unfamiliar. He said he was a minimalist. On his website, he wrote about how this movement called minimalism allowed him to focus on the important stuff in his life while shedding the excess crap that got in the way. This was fascinating. It was like someone turned on a light bulb for us for the first time and presented us with a tool to help us weed through the clutter in our lives to get to what was important. Because he traveled, he only owned 72 things at the time. There were pictures of all his possessions on his website, all of which possessions could fit into a bag he carried with him while he traveled. The most striking part about this was Colin's contentment. He exuded happiness and excitement and passion. He loved his life, and this was completely apparent. It's important to note that although we deeply respect Colin, we didn't want to live like him. We didn't want to travel the world or live with less than 100 things. But we did want the freedom that his minimalist lifestyle afforded him, and we wanted the happiness and passion that accompanied that freedom. And so during the first half of 2010, we slowly removed our anchors, one by one, as we followed Colin's journey. But maybe we were too old and too rooted to become minimalists. Maybe this minimalism thing was only for young guys without many possessions who wanted to travel extensively. We discovered that wasn't true either. Through Colin, we discovered two other minimalists who were in many ways a lot like us, Leo Babauta and Joshua Becker. Leo Babauta, creator of Zen Habits, had a story that resonated with us immediately. He was a once-divorced guy in his mid-30s who overcame all kinds of adversity to live a more meaningful life. Using minimalism to simplify his life, he had been able to accomplish some amazing things in less than 3 years. He had quit smoking, lost 70 pounds, got into the best shape of his life, got out of debt, moved from his native Guam to San Francisco, and quit his corporate job, but was still able to provide for his wife and 6 children. Similarly, 30-something Joshua Becker, a husband and father of 2 children living in Vermont, was able to simplify his suburban family life using minimalism while maintaining his job at a local church and helping other people learn more about minimalism through his website, Becoming Minimalist. Leo Babauta and Joshua Becker proved to us that minimalism wasn't only for single white guys who didn't want to work a 9 to 5. It was for anyone who was interested in living a simpler, more intentional life. It was for anyone who wanted to focus on the important aspects in life, rather than the material possessions that are so heavily linked to success and happiness by our culture. In fact, on our website we have a page dedicated to defining minimalism in a parodic, tongue-in-cheek way, poking fun at the cynics and skeptics who treat minimalism as a trend or fad. We start our definition with a joke. To be a minimalist, you must live with less than 100 things, and you can't own a car or a home or a TV, and you can't have a career, and you have to be able to live in exotic places all over the world, and you have to write a blog, and you can't have any children, and you have to be a young white male from a privileged background. Okay, we're joking, obviously. But people who often dismiss minimalism as some sort of fad or trend usually mention some of the above restrictions as to why they could never be a minimalist. The truth is that minimalism isn't about any of those things, but it can help you accomplish all that stuff. Well, to be fair, it can help you become a young white male if you aren't one. But who cares about that anyway? If you desire to live with less than 100 things, or not own a car, or travel all over the world without fear, minimalism can help. But that's not the point. The point is that minimalism is a tool to help you achieve freedom. Freedom from fear, freedom from worry, freedom from overwhelm, freedom from guilt, freedom from depression, freedom from enslavement. Freedom. Real freedom. A minimalist can, however, own a car, or own a house, or have children, or have a career. Minimalism looks different for everyone because it is about finding what is essential to you. There are tons of successful minimalists who do some or all these things. So how can they all be so different and yet still be minimalists? That brings us back to our original question. What is minimalism? Minimalism is a tool we use to live a meaningful life. It is a tool to achieve happiness, which is, let's face it, what we are all looking for. We all want to be happy. Minimalism can help. There are no rules in minimalism. Rather, minimalism is simply about stripping away the unnecessary things in your life so you can focus on what's important. Minimalism has helped us in several ways, including reclaiming our time, ridding ourselves of excess stuff, enjoying our lives, discovering meaning in our lives, living in the moment, focusing on what's important, pursuing our passions, finding happiness, doing anything we want to do, finding our missions, experiencing freedom, creating more, consuming less. How has minimalism helped us with these things? Minimalism is a lifestyle choice. Minimalists choose to get rid of the unnecessary in favor of what's important. But the level of specificity is up to you. Minimalists search for happiness not through things, but through life itself. Thus, it's up to you to determine what is necessary and what is superfluous to your life. Throughout this book, we intend to give you some ideas of how to determine these things and how to achieve a minimalist lifestyle without having to succumb to some sort of strict code or set of rules. A word of warning, it isn't easy to take the first few steps, but the journey gets much easier and more rewarding the further you go. But the first steps into minimalism often take some radical changes in mindset, actions, and habits. So if we had to sum it up in one sentence, we would say minimalism is a tool to eliminate life's excess, focus on the essentials, and find happiness, fulfillment, and freedom. Embracing minimalism, it was as our lives were spiraling downward in ever-diminishing circles towards empty oblivion that we embraced minimalism. Or perhaps it embraced us. As it were, it was a beacon in the night. We lingered curiously on the limbic portions of minimalism's perimeter, scouring feverishly through internet page after internet page, looking for more information and guidance and enlightenment, watching and learning and trying to understand what this whole minimalism thing was all about. Through months of research, while we removed our anchors, we traveled farther and farther down the rabbit hole, and over time we had discovered a group of people without a lot of things, but with myriad happiness and passion and freedom, things for which we desperately yearned. Eventually, we embraced the concepts of minimalism and simplicity as a way of life, and discovered that we too could be happy. But it wasn't through owning more stuff. It wasn't through accumulation. We took back control of our lives so we could focus on what's important, so we could focus on life's deeper meaning. Happiness, as far as we are concerned, is achieved internally through living a meaningful life. A life that is filled with passion and freedom. A life in which we can grow as individuals and contribute to other people in meaningful ways. These are the bedrocks of happiness, not stuff. Creating To the Minimalists 11 in the summer of 2010, we had no intentions of writing nonfiction online or starting a website about minimalism. But then, almost accidentally, Joshua met Colin right in person while on a trip to New York City in June. Meeting Colin solidified his online personas. His personality shone through in person, displaying layers of happiness and contentment that didn't seem possible to a discontented man approaching 30, living on the corporate continuum. They met in Manhattan after connecting on Twitter. Joshua had been writing literary fiction throughout his 20s, whenever he had a free moment outside of work. He knew Colin was making money online publishing his own material, and he wanted to pick Colin's brain about self-publishing. They met for lunch, and Colin was incredibly helpful. He encouraged Joshua to explore the non-traditional route of publishing his fiction, citing several resources that would later become helpful. They stayed in contact after that initial meeting and eventually worked on several projects together, including Colin's memoir My Exile Lifestyle and Joshua's short story collection Falling While Sitting Down. During that meeting, Colin said one thing that stuck with Joshua, the one thing that led him to team up with Ryan to create the Minimalists. You should do something online. You could make an impact. The world needs people like you to help them see things more clearly. Joshua wrote these words in his journal. They stuck with him long after the meeting. And with those words, we decided to create the Minimalists. We wanted to do two things with our website. We wanted to document our personal journeys into minimalism, and we wanted to help other people live more meaningful lives using minimalism as a foundation. We started building the site in November 2010, and quickly discovered we were absolutely clueless about how to create a website. We didn't know the first thing about HTML or blogging or writing nonfiction online. Sure, Joshua had his literary fiction writing experience, which helped with our writing, but we were clueless about the rest. So we did extensive research and built our site over a 6-week time frame, laboring vigorously until the last minute. We officially launched theminimalists.com on December 14th, 2010. And so there we were. These two suit anti-corporate guys, nearing 30 as our 20s twilight, listening to and taking advice from some Gen Y blogger. We had started a website, documented our journey into minimalism, and started writing a couple essays a week for the site. And then several months of unexpected excitement transpired, and our lives changed within 9 months of creating our website. We met some of the most amazing people on the internet, eventually turning those online relationships into real-life friendships, the likes of whom included incredibly cool bloggers like the aforementioned Leo Babauta and Joshua Becker, as well as myriad others such as Julian Smith, Chris Gilbo, and all with the help of many of these outstanding people, as well as our amazing readers who relentlessly shared our essays. Our website grew exponentially within 9 months. We had over 100,000 monthly readers and over 10,000 subscribed readers. By that time, people were spending over 11,000 hours per month on our site. We had been featured and interviewed on popular websites all over the web. We received the most incredible emails about how we have changed people's lives with our essays. We published an essay collection called Minimalism, Essential Essays, which reached #1 on Amazon's bestseller list. Joshua published his first fiction book, Falling While Sitting Down, Stories, which also reached #1, as did the first publication of the book you're reading right now. As a consequence, we both left our corporate jobs and began focusing full-time on living more meaningful lives. What it means to live a meaningful life. What does it mean to live a meaningful life? Generally, through our essays and books, we speak of minimalism as a tool that has allowed us to pursue more meaningful lives, so it's important we define what this means. After much cerebration, deliberation, discussion, research, and experimentation, we discovered 5 dimensions that allow us to live a meaningful life. Health, relationships, passions, growth, contribution. It took us months of removing the anchors from our lives and getting rid of the clutter that surrounded us to discover these 5 areas. We didn't stumble into them haphazardly. Instead, we discovered what was most important in our lives through trial and error. Minimalism made this discovery possible. By age 28, everything in our lives seemed foggy. We had everything we were supposed to have, everything our culture advertised would make us happy, and yet we weren't. Worse, we had gotten to the point at which we didn't know what was important anymore. Getting rid of the clutter in our lives allowed us rediscover these 5 key areas. Thus, getting rid of our stuff was the initial bite at the apple, allowing us to make room to fill our lives with more meaningful pursuits. Through months of rigorous documentation, the above 5 areas are the areas we changed in our lives that had the largest positive impact and resulted in more satisfaction and contentment for the two of us. The following 5 chapters discuss each of these concepts in depth, much more than can be discussed on our website. Throughout these chapters, we consider why these areas are the most important areas of our lives, how minimalism has allowed us to focus on these dimensions, and we give you personal examples of how we changed our lives in all 5 areas. The book's final chapter, Confluence, binds together these 5 dimensions and asks the reader some important questions about his or her life. These questions are not rhetorical. They are meant to make you think, take notes, and make lists based on those questions. Similarly, as we stated in this book's foreword, we encourage you to actively engage in all the following chapters by reading the content more than once, taking notes, highlighting meaningful passages, making lists, and, most importantly, taking action. Ultimately, this book is meant to make you take little actions each day that will radically improve your life over time. Let's begin, shall we?